Every once in a while, we get a piece of investigative reporting that tells us a lot about Donald Trump, who he chooses to associate himself with, and how he operates. And on Sunday, the New York Times posted one of those stories, and boy, was it a doozy. This Times report was just about one of the 143 pardons and commutations that Trump granted on his last day in office. One given to a guy named Jonathan Braun, courtesy of Jared Kushner. And I want to tell you the story of this guy because, as I said, this one story tells us a lot about how Trump operated as president and also how we can expect he would continue to operate if he was to win a second term. It all began back in 2009, after the DEA raided what prosecutors said was a stash house for a marijuana smuggling ring that Braun was running. As the Times reports, when Braun found out about the raid, he rented a car and drove 25 hours straight from Florida to an Indian reservation in upstate New York where, dressed in all black, he was smuggled into Canada, according to court filings. He then fled to Israel. Not exactly the actions of an innocent guy, I think it's fair to say. But by 2010, he was behind bars in New York as he awaited trial. Braun eventually agreed to plead guilty after nearly a year and a half in jail. And as part of that deal with prosecutors, he began secretly cooperating with other investigations into drug smuggling in exchange for house arrest and delayed sentencing. Then, as the Times writes, for reasons that remain unexplained, Mr. Braun was then permitted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn to live relatively freely for nearly the next decade. And that's when he was able to turn his focus to an enterprise rife with cash and threats, providing loans to struggling small businesses that often had nowhere else to turn. This, as you probably know, is commonly known as predatory lending, or as some law enforcement officials might call it, loan sharking, giving vulnerable small businesses money very quickly, but on the condition of exorbitant interest rates. And with Braun, those interest rates were sometimes greater than 1,000%. And if those loans weren't paid in full, Braun often followed up with threats of violence. Among those he threatened was a real estate developer who said Braun told him, quote, "I will take your daughters from you." Another borrower said in an affidavit that Braun told him, "Be thankful you're not in New York because your family would find you floating in the Hudson." And according to the Times report, Braun told a rabbi who owed him money, "I'm going to make you bleed." Nearly a decade after Braun was charged in the drug case, prosecutors finally scheduled his sentencing. And during this process, accusations of his violent threats were filed on the docket of the judge overseeing the case, of course, leading that judge to sentence Braun to 10 years in prison. Now, while he was serving his sentence, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan was trying to build a wide-ranging criminal fraud case focused on predatory lenders, the world that Braun had spent the last decade working in. So Braun was kind of the perfect candidate to serve as a cooperator to aid prosecutors. And according to the Times, when he was approached with an opportunity to get out of prison, he made it clear he would do anything the government asked him, including wearing a wire to record calls with his former business partners. But, as the Times also explains, what the prosecutors did not know was that Braun, his family, and allies were pursuing an entirely different effort to help him regain his freedom through the White House's clemency process. And among the channels that they were exploiting was a tie to the Kushner family. Yes, that family. See, according to the Times, Braun had gone to school with Jared's younger sister, and their fathers had known each other for years. Braun and his family also retained the help of Alan Dershowitz, a Trump ally with close ties with Jared. And would you believe it? The White House angle ended up working out for Braun. Just hours before Trump left office on January 20th of 2021, the White House sent out the news release written by Mr. Kushner's office announcing Mr. Braun's commutation. He no longer agreed to cooperate in the case, of course, about the predatory lender. I mean, why would he? He had a get-out-of-jail-free card, courtesy of Donald Trump. And just a few months after his release, wouldn't you know, Braun was back working as a predatory lending loan shark. So what does this all tell us? For one, it tells us that tough-on-crime Donald Trump upended a federal investigation by his own Justice Department. It's not how it's supposed to work. It also tells us how Trump and his administration ran pretty fast and loose with presidential pardons, a tremendous power that usually runs through a highly vetted process out of the Department of Justice. But not so in the Trump administration. You may have heard this line before, but there's this old quote that goes, "For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law." That is how Donald Trump has operated. And that is how he will continue to operate if he ever gets the levers of government again.